then when we injected the microbubbles in the first experiment and sonicated, and I saw the first image, I exactly knew why it worked and why. Oh, yeah, 20 years, everybody will have ultrasound device in their home for both entertainment and for sleep help or whatever it might be. So, but sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. It just wasn't working, and we spent like a year trying to get the experimental demonstration that you can focus through the skull with the imaging. I had published another paper before saying that you can get the thickness from MRI, and it focused in that skulls, but it was not universal. And then it was in one of the ultrasound meetings, I was sitting there and thinking this problem and listening the talks, and then I suddenly understood. Okay, yes, this is quite.
Welcome to Stimulating Brains.
Dr. Kullervo Hynynen is Vice President of Research and Innovation, a full professor and senior scientist at Sunnybrook Research Institute, and he's most widely known for essentially inventing MR-Guided Focused Ultrasound surgery. His research has focused on studying the effects of ultrasound beams on tissue and their utilization in therapy. He's investigating the use of focused ultrasound for non-invasive surgery, vascular surgery, targeted drug delivery, and gene therapy. I think it's fair to say that without his pioneering contributions, we would not be able to carry out MR-guided focused ultrasound surgeries today. For some of you that might be more interested in exactly what these contributions were, there's a beautiful website by the Focused Ultrasound Foundation that shows a timeline of milestones in FUS therapy, and you will see his name pop up a lot of times. Just to mention some examples, in 1991, he proposed the first use of FUS for brain tumors. In 1992, he proposed the use of non-invasive focused ultrasound using MRI guidance and monitoring tissue damage. And hence, in the same year, he coined the term MR-Guided Focused Ultrasound for the first time. In 1996, he published the first application of FUS to open the blood-brain barrier. In 1998, he demonstrated the feasibility of using a large phased array applicator for through-skull focusing, and he also proposed the benefits of using cavitation for through-skull treatments. And maybe finally, for this list of examples, 2001 was a year of breakthroughs in brain research. He determined that focused ultrasound combined with microbubbles can cause localized and reversible disruption of the blood-brain barrier, which of course was historically a major obstacle in the treatment of brain diseases. In the same year, his group also demonstrated non-invasive focusing through the human skull using a phased array and CT-based planning algorithm. At Sunnybrook, Dr. Hynynen directs a huge group of around 50 to 100 members that fluctuate and do a lot of things across the entire landscape of focused ultrasound in animals and of course also in humans. For me, it was a big honor to talk to him today. And I really understood a bit more about the origins of MR-guided focused ultrasound, how it all started, what were the problems, and even going back before his time, who were the pioneers that used this technique even as early as 1942, although without going through the skull. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, and I thank you for tuning in to Stimulating Brains. Dr. Hynynen, it's a great honor and pleasure to talk with you. It's really great that you take the time to talk with us about focused ultrasound. therapy, I will have already introduced you more formally by now. So we can directly start with the interview. And to break the ice, before we get into science, I usually ask about free time and hobbies. What do you do when not involved in research?
Well, I mean, I'm married, so I spend time with my wife. But personally, I like running and exercising, walking, and hiking. So those are kind of things. And then reading, of course. Reading is one of my hobbies. And then I also spend lots of time in community service.
Okay, what do you do there?
Well, I'm involved with my church, providing service there, whatever is needed.
Great. And for reading, do you get to read prose, or is it mainly science books these days?
I like prose, but mainly historic books. So
okay,
like history, especially.
Great.
Try to learn from history and mistakes that people have made.
That makes a lot of sense. Great. Going into the science, who were your key mentors in your career, and what were the critical turning points to get where you are now?
I think one of the first one was my supervisor for a summer project when I was undergraduate, who kind of opened my eyes a little bit what research is like, and then colleagues when I during PhD phase. Other students, more advanced students, and then when I was junior faculty, there were some professors who were very helpful as a role model. Do you want names, or just?
If you want to share, sure. Who was there somebody that stuck out, maybe that you think, if I hadn't met this person or so, then I would be a different scientist or something like that?
Yeah. So for my PhD supervisors, of course, David Watmore. I learned lots from him about ultrasound, and then Professor Mallard, who was kind of my supervisor, but I met with him like once a month. But he kind of gave the higher level idea. And then when I was in Arizona, at University of Arizona, Bob Romer was one of them. He hired me, and he was kind of mentoring me. And those were the people that really had big impact.
Great. So I think you were the first person to coin, or like your lab at least, to coin the term MR-Guided Focused Ultrasound. And I think you're widely seen as the key person, methodological inventor even of that technology, even though focused ultrasound has a lot of history before that. This April, we both attended a meeting on focused ultrasound surgery in Boston. And I think 2 years ago, in 2021, focused ultrasound surgeries surpassed deep brain stimulation surgeries for essential tremor. So more procedures being done now with FAST than with DBS. Up until April 2023, so just recently, 71 FAST systems have been purchased from Insightec alone. So how does it feel as the pioneer and inventor of the method to have created such a growing and vibrant field that now helps a lot of patients and has become mainstream?
It is very rewarding. There are kind of two sides of it. So one is that it has taken a long time.
Okay.
So it feels that, okay, well, like you have run a marathon and there is no much joy left anymore when you reach the goal line.
Yeah.
But then when you see a patient procedure and see how grateful the patients are and what impact it has to those people who are observing it, because every time it's almost like a miracle. It's instantaneous relief in the patient's symptoms with the tremor treatments. So that is very, very rewarding. and I get a good feeling every time when I see it.
I can imagine. Do you see the procedures yourself quite a lot at Sunnybrook, or?
I used to be, most of them, but now I don't see them that many. I go occasionally there and see and enjoy it.
Sounds good. So the history of using focused ultrasound to interact with the brain goes way before your time. So we can maybe briefly touch upon that too. Goes back, I think, as I understood, back to John Lynn and colleagues who published a paper in Science as early as 1942. And I think in that first paper, they were able to lesion the bovine liver. And a bit later, in carefully designed animal experiments, they produced focal lesions deep inside the brain and spinal cord without damaging collateral non-targeted tissue using HIFU. While initially trying to sonicate brain through the intact skull, I think they did damage the skin and underlying tissue by producing burns to the scalp, muscles, and even meninges. So that resulted from extreme strong attenuation of the ultrasound beam while passing through the skull bone. So they had to revert to use craniectomies. And if I understand correctly, that was maybe why the technique never really took off in earlier days, right? Because you always had to remove the skull. Can you give us a broad overview about the main players in the history, and then also the technical challenges they had?
Yeah, so you're correct. The Lin work was the first one to my knowledge, and it was very important because it demonstrated the ability to focus ultrasound. They observed that the bone will heat too much and that it needs to be removed, and kind of recommended that technique and using multiple beams. And then Fry brothers followed that advice and did lots of basic work while removing the bone, but studying the interactions of the ultrasound beam on the brain tissue. So the work was very important, although it demonstrated the barrier and people believed it's impossible to treat with the skull, but it was very important for the Fry brothers to have, I think, 10, 15 years of work that looked into very, very basic things with the ultrasound interaction. And then there was in Boston, Dr. Laley, who did also lots of work. He was working at MIT at the end, looking at the basic interactions and understanding the thermal interactions and the cavitational interactions with the brain tissue. So those were kind of the basic how ultrasound interacts with brain tissue and demonstrating the ability to use it for surgery. And then, of course, Frank Fry's later work with the propagation through bone, so that you can get some ultrasound through the bone. And when I saw that paper as a graduate student, I realized, okay, we can go through the bone. And that's when the idea stuck my head and try to figure out how to do it in practice. It took many years, but eventually it moved forward. But those were the key people whose papers I read very, very carefully and learned huge amounts of.
Great. Yeah, so you mentioned the Fry brothers, I think William and Francis, or Bill and Frank Fry, and they were in Illinois in 46, and then I think also did first partial ablation of the basal ganglia in 55. And then what I heard is that the first therapeutic use in humans was maybe by Lars Lexell in 1950 for psychiatric indications, and then Russell Myers in 62 in Parkinsonian patients. But that was all with craniectomies, so not through the skull. So was very limited. And I think, for example, Lars Lexell, went away from HIFU soon after, right? And then used different methods to burn lesions. So turning to your work, you already mentioned you were quite inspired by the work of the Frys. Before turning the brain, though, I think you developed ultrasound arrays for treating uterine fibroids. Was that because that's easier because there was no skull problem there, or what was the main reasoning to go to the uterus?
Well, I was originally involved in hyperthermia treatments where we developed scan focused ultrasound. So I was originally involved in developing hyperthermia systems where we scanned the focused ultrasound beam to hit the tumors and was the cancer treatment to sensitize them for radiation therapy. And we did, it was external to brain initially, and then we did brain also by taking a skull flap off. Then when we worked with GE to develop a system for MR guidance, it was first breast tumors because that's easily accessible. And then the idea came that uterine fibroids is a big problem, and that would be something that is commercially interesting for first for GE and then for Inside Tech. And so that was the first thing, that clinical indication that we went after, and mainly because the market and the ease of the targeting brain is more complicated.
Yeah. And
but
so,
it doesn't. Okay, go ahead.
So can you, so I know, a few landmark points. So for example, in 1991, you proposed the first use of FUS for brain tumors, as you mentioned. And then in 1992, you proposed the use of non-invasive focused ultrasound using MRI guidance and monitoring tissue damage, which I think was also the same year where you used MR-Guided Focused Ultrasound. And then I think in 1993, you joined the Brigham Women's Hospital. So the hospital I currently work in as faculty, where you reached the rank of full professor at Harvard Medical School here in Boston. And I think, as I understood, here in Boston, you carried out first trans-skull sonications using skulls from Harvard Medical School. So it is a bit hard for me from the outside to unpack the history of, what were the key steps that were necessary before, and then maybe also if you want to talk about how the companies were involved in this. So yeah, getting through the skull, I think, was always the biggest problem. And what were the landmarks for you, or the stepping stones to unpack this part of the history a bit?
So I had NIH grants for using these focused ultrasound beams with short pulses for cancer treatments, and mainly like outside the brain. And then I sent a $25,000 proposal to ask money to do feasibility experiment with going through the bone, skull bone. And the reviewers said that not possible.
Okay.
And I had one of my graduate students was in an anatomy class and said, well, we can get the skull fragment there because I was discussing him about this problem. And I said, so he got a skull fragment there. And I spent about a year doing experiments. I got to build a little phased array and experiments in the lab, demonstrating that you can actually correct the focusing through the skull with a large phased array, and then applied for the NIH grant, and then a regular R01, and then I got that. And so that was a key piece to demonstrate that you can get it done. Then the second piece was that try to use imaging to calculate that correction. And I was lucky to find Craig Clement as a PhD postdoc came, and he had all the skills for calculating ultrasound fields. And so we started developing these models and looking at CT information, looking at thickness, and using this skull measurements, speed of sound measurements that Fry had published. But sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. It just wasn't working, and we spent like a year trying to get the experimental demonstration that you can focus through the skull with the imaging. I had published another paper before saying that you can get the thickness from MRI, and it focused in that skulls, but it was not universal. And then it was in one of the ultrasound meetings, I was sitting there and thinking this problem and listening to talks, and then I suddenly understood, okay, yes, this is quite a blind side that I didn't understand. Okay, for speed of sound depends on density of the material. So we need to take the density, not just the thickness from the CT, but the density, and not just the structure, but the density structure. And so then we did measurements and tried to correlate, and it started to correlate well. But then I had a student, Chris Connor from MIT, who was computer science major. And he said, because we had this optimization problem, skull density varies along the thickness. So you put an ultrasound beam and you get one measurement, but there are many values. So how do you get the real density dependence? And he used machine learning techniques. So we used machine learning at that time already to get the density dependence, the speed of sound dependence on the density of the bone. And that allowed, and he also got the attenuation dependence. And so those were the key measurements that allowed us to go through the skull bone. And then we waited for a year to file the patents before we published the result. But that was, at that point, it was clear it's going to work.
Interesting. And when was that? What year, roughly?
About 2001.
Okay. And so the speed of sound is dependent on density, makes a lot of sense. And that was a eureka moment in that meeting, it sounds like. Very interesting. I think also a key aspect of this work was probably always to have techs that could build the arrays, right? The hardware, engineering, and so on. And we have I think Philip Jason White is here in Boston still, was in your lab, now a professor at Simmons University, and runs a biomedical ultrasound lab there. At the time, as we heard in that meeting, and I think Reese Cosgrove said, he was a struggling classically trained musician who needed a job to make ends meet. And or he said it himself, I think he phased out of music and into science. You had funding. I think he did play a role in the early days, and then his wife, Tonya Giesecke, apparently created as a tech the first hemispheric array. So is that, I think, as I understand, that was the first fuzz array to be used on the brain. And I also heard the device now sits in Toronto, and apparently it was an interesting story. Can you tell that how that interaction came about?
Yeah, so I had good at that point. I had a good amount of funding, and I was looking at technicians that could work. And Jason's background was very interesting, so he knows acoustics. So I hired him. So he did lots of basic measurements and kind of explored the use of shear waves to the skull, which make it possible to do larger volumes, and are kind of key component now. And other things, and I encouraged him to do his PhD, and he eventually wrote the papers and was able to get the PhD at Penn State. So I think my contribution for him was as pushing him to get the degree. But so, and then the other technician that I hired was Tonya, and she was very good with her hands. And so together we looked at okay, well, I wanted to build this hemispherical array, and we couldn't buy it from anywhere. So before that, we had smaller, like 10 centimeter arrays that we diced and then made them phased arrays. But 30 centimeter diameter, nobody could manufacture it. So we bought lots of small, 64 smaller transducers, And then the question, as regularly curve transducers, and the question was, okay, well, how can we assemble this? So then Tonia looked into the shapes, how we can do them, and then cut them to the shapes with the diamond wire saw and assembled the array. So it was only 64 elements, but it could put 4 kilowatts of acoustic power out. So so taking that power out and having we had to have a phased array driver. We couldn't buy it, so we built that also. I had Mark Buchanan in the lab, who was electrical engineer and got his master's under me in Arizona, and then came and he built the drivers with others to be able to drive that kind of high power. And we used that array to demonstrate you can go to the skull bone. And the idea of which we had simulated that, okay, taking the whole area of the skull bone, you can go through it without overheating. And it worked quite well in experiments, and was the next step to build the bigger arrays. So
64 arrays, you said only. How many do modern devices have?
So the modern devices, clinical device, 1,024 elements.
Okay, well, that's of course order of
magnitude. Our experimental area is now 4,000.
4,000. Okay, wow. And I think another player that is still here at the Brigham is Nathan McDonald. He now works closely with Reese Cosgrove, our functional neurosurgeon. And I think he also was key part in the beginning. And I've seen many papers from that time together with Nathan. What was his role there in these early days? Can you comment?
Yeah, so Nathan was a key keeper. He was a student in Tufts University and couldn't find anybody to do medical physics, so he called me, and I was always looking for students. So I said, yeah, sure. And initially, he was very keen on MRI. So he was doing the experiments with me to using thermal ablation with MRI, both in the brain and other areas. And he tested the concepts of how can we use the MRI thermometry and how can we use it to control and to treat the tumors precisely. So he developed MATLAB interface for the treatment, monitoring and control, and that kind of form was the basis for the commercial interface eventually.
Great.
And so that was how we started. And then he got involved in the animal experiments with the MRI for brain. And then so he was not building the skull propagation platforms, but in those experiments, later on, we started looking into modulating the blood-brain barrier permeability. And so that was, we spent like 5 years trying to get some parameters that would modulate blood-brain barrier. And then one day, we said, let's try microbubbles. And that's when we realized, okay, that's how it's going to work. So Nathan was there with me, and we spent those experiments were done with him, and then he continued, has done beautiful work on the animal side, and then now involved in the human side also.
So microbubbles, I think if you apply them, that is they exploit the effect of cavitation. Can you explain a little bit in lay terms how that works or what that does?
So cavitation. So what when you use ultrasound, the ultrasound is pressure wave, which has high pressure and low pressure, and when you increase the amplitude enough and you have that beam in a tissue, eventually the low pressure wave will pull gas out of the tissue, and that gas is of course very compressible. And so you have these small bubbles, and they expand, and during the rarefaction of the wave, and then they collapse during the high pressure phase of the wave. And that collapse is very violent, and it can break tissues. It also enhances the ultrasound attenuation, so you get much higher temperatures. So traditionally, people have thought that it's a bad thing. Actually, there was a resolution in one of the international ultrasound meetings saying you should avoid cavitation because the people felt that it breaks the tissue and causes cancer spreading and metastasis. So it enhances bioeffects of ultrasound. So if you gas bubbles, you can get much bigger bioeffects. And so what is these bubbles that we are talking here? These are bubbles that are injected in the bloodstream. These are 2 to 3 micrometers in size. They are encased in a lipid cell. And when they come to ultrasound field, they expand and contract with the pressure wave. And of course, gas is much more compressible, so the motion is much bigger than it is in the liquids or in the tissue itself. So they are very effective energy concentrators. And now when they are in the capillaries, they expand and they stretch the capillary. They're expanding, and then when they collapse, they pull the capillary walls tighter, so the lumen gets smaller. And that happens at ultrasound frequency. So, for example, if you use half megahertz, that's 500,000 times a second. So you have this fast pushing and pulling, and that causes the endothelial cells in the blood-brain barrier to come apart a little bit and open the tight junctions. So that's kind of what's happening. How we are utilizing them, because the compression, not to let the bubbles to collapse, because once they collapse, they rip the vessels apart and you get bleeding. But if you are just exciting them enough to have this mechanical force, then you can modulate the blood-brain barrier.
Great. And I think you also, just to mention that your importance in the field, in 1996, you were again first to publish on this application of, or the idea even of using FAST to open the blood-brain barrier. So, you know, if you read through the history of focused ultrasound, there's a lot of your name appearing in many milestones. So, really impressive. I think right now in the history, we are at the stage where it worked, right? But then applying it in patients is a big another step. And I guess the company played a role, but that's really a mystery time for me. So probably you just have to tell us a bit, how did you end up treating the first patient? And then was that at the Brigham, or where did that happen? What was the process to go there? In the brain, I mean.
So thermal ablation, it happened in 2015. 2005. Yeah, 2005. We treated the first patient for thermal ablation, first trying to ablate tumors. Not very successful, but we could see the temperature elevation, and we got almost high enough to ablate. So that was the first milestone, seeing, okay, you can do this in the patients. With the blood-brain barrier modulation, it was quite tough. People were kind of saying, oh, you cannot do this in the patients. So when I came here, I tried to see if it can be done. And I think that the Insightec had a system, low frequency system, which was designed to utilize bubbles to enhance heating of the ablation, so you can ablate more, so and enhance the ultrasound absorption. And that my studies that would be good frequency for blood-brain barrier modulation. So we worked with the company. Okay, can we modify it so that we can use it for blood-brain barrier, and they agreed to give us algorithms that we can do simple experiments in animals. So we did pigs, and showed that okay, yeah, it could work. And then Nathan did work in non-human primates, showing that it indeed can be done. And then I talked to neurosurgeons, and they are more aggressive than radiologists, so they were eager to do it in the patients. Took us first patient was very impressive. We knew that it's going to work, but it took us, the first 3 patients took us, I think, well, like 2 or 3 years to recruit, because this was not really benefit for a patient. We had a modulated blood-brain barrier, opening blood-brain barrier with chemo, and then the patient went to surgery and they took the tumor out. So not too much benefit. And then when we move to a phase where we can, the surgery is up front, and then we do the chemotherapy afterwards, then we start to recruit more patients. But it was quite interesting experience, because we how to control it, and humans and in human skull, and lots of people, and none of us quite knowing what we are doing. So
yeah, and that was at Sunnybrook, I think, much later. So when was the first?
2015 was that.
2015. Okay. So going back to the ablation piece of it in the Brigham, what is needed to translate something like that into a human? It's very invasive, right? You destroy cell tissues. The first in human, was it still, with was it already with the InsideTech array, or was it via an FDA grant, NIH grant with FDA approval, or how did that work to get it?
Yeah, no, it was it was with InsideTech array. We had worked with Imasonics to get 512 channel array, and did all the experiments with animals going to human skull and demonstrated it works. And then the company took that array, integrated with their system, and they came back. And at that time, we had used like face mask, radiation immobilization device, to keep the patient in stationary. It was not very comfortable with the patients, but that was the first start. And it turned out that this system we didn't have enough power. So we got almost there, but not quite there.
Got it.
And then the company developed the next array with 1024 elements. And the first system went to Zurich, didn't come to Boston, unfortunately. Okay. And they were able to apply it for pain treatments. And then University of Virginia was studied the essential tremor. So I got a system, we bought a system here when I came, and I invited all the neurosurgeons in the city to come and discuss, okay, we have the system, but what can we do with ablation? And it was interesting because lots of ideas, but it felt to me like the ideas were not the patients that they were treating, but it's somebody else's patients.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the approvals to treat tremor. So tremor came out, essential tremor. And we had the approvals to treat for a year, but for some reason we didn't get going with it.
Okay.
Until the Virginia treated the first patients. And then Jeff Elias came here, we treated the first patient, showed us how to do it. And after the first patient, our neurosurgeons, were not convinced. After the second patient, they were convinced. So that's how it started.
And so the emergence of InsideTech, I think they also started outside of the brain, but then at some point, now focus quite a bit on the brain. Were you part of the company, or did they license patents from you, or how did that originate?
So what happened? So outside the brain, I had started working with MR-Guided Focused Ultrasound with GE.
Okay.
in Arizona, and then and I came to Boston. They gave us the system that we could treat in fibroadenomas in the breast and then breast cancer, and then Insight Tech was created. So the span of Insight Tech with Elpic Medical, and we continued being their main. We did animal experiments and had ideas and designs, and did the phase array work first, uterine fibroids, and they developed the system, and we did the first treatments and gave feedback and so forth. So we worked closely with them. And parallel to that, on the same time, I was working with my NIH grant going through the skull. And then when we demonstrated to them, filed the patents on it and demonstrated how we can go through the skull, the company wanted to do that. So they licensed the patents going through the skull. And unfortunately, the field, now the patents are expiring. So unfortunately, royalty income is kind of late with these kind of devices. So that's how it happens. And so that's and when I left, so I worked with them very closely, and they gave us research grants when I was in Boston. When I came here, the relationship stopped. We bought the system, and we were treating patients, and that relationship continued. And I have continued with my NIH grant and other grants to develop the technology outside, which is gives us freedom to do research.
That sounds great. Okay, very interesting. And so you are currently, if I remember your talk correctly, you're currently building the next generation focused ultrasound. You mentioned it may have up to 4,000 arrays, transducers. I mean, and it does involve custom-made head casts. Is that? Do I remember that correctly? That you have to personalize it for each brain a bit, or is?
Yeah, that is correct. So we have an idea of using rapid prototyping based on the CT and MRI information of the patient. So the helmet design is an optimization process where we use numerical models to optimize the helmet what would work for the target that we are to do for each patient. And that allows us to not to have pin fixation, and also to use pre-existing imaging. So we don't need to put the patient in the MRI scanner. And what we are doing, we're using acoustic feedback. We have very large array of acoustic receivers, and from that we can create the acoustic field and see how the bubbles oscillate and where they are, so we can localize them. So this allows us a very precise control on the volume. This for blood-brain barrier modulation mainly, or neurostimulation. Potentially could be ablation also, but that's not been our goal right now. But the idea is that to get away from the online MRI, make it something that you can do in a clinic if you need to do daily chemotherapy treatments or something like that.
Interesting. Very cool. I've always wondered, since you mentioned blood-brain barrier and neuromodulation, the idea of being exactly at the cusp of maybe doing something with the cells, but not destroying them or lesioning them, sounds like, you have to be, as a layperson, you have to be exactly at the sweet spot to, not go over the intensity. Do you think in neuromodulation applications, also, let's say with this Insight Tech device or other devices, do people, are we confident enough that there's really no lesioning of small cells or single cells? Or do you think there will always be some alteration maybe of the microstructure around the cells when applying this?
That's a very good question. It, of course, there could be alterations that depends on the level of exposure. And like with the blood-brain barrier, it heals. So we have blood-brain barrier modulation, it heals, but there is inflammation that develops for temporarily. It got too high and then it becomes causing damage. But But yeah, we see very interesting results with neuromodulation. And reading the literature, it seems that it is actually the one that you go too high and then you don't get the same effect, or there is a sweet spot. So how to control it? It's still an open question. Yeah. I think we can calibrate the pressure amplitude well enough in the brain so we can get precise exposures with the device that we have. But do we know enough about the brain to know exactly what's happening? No.
Yeah.
There's still lots of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I also thought about exactly this question recently when I read a recent biological psychiatry paper by Ali Rezai's group. They used HIFU modulation, so neuromodulation with the inside track array to the nucleus accumbens in patients with addiction. And it was a single sonication treatment, not ablative. And they had very long-lasting effects. And I think I talked to part of the team, and they were also very surprised by their own data. That after a single treatment, I think if I'm correct, 6 months later, there was still a good effect in many patients on remaining abstinent. So that's where I thought, maybe we don't lesion, but maybe there must be some sort of structural change in maybe some aberrant circuits which would, could be a gold mine or a potential amazing thing if we kind of disrupt maybe local circuitry that leads to aberrant overactivity in the nucleus accumbens or so. Any thoughts on that study or that concept?
Yeah, no, it's the result is surprising, but it's very, very intriguing. So yeah. And it's not isolated result. So there is literature emerging that there are some sub threshold events and impacts, and especially in the brain, because it's so difficult to know all the circuitry.
Yeah,
and the feedback, you have inhibition, you have stimulation, and all that, and feedback mechanisms, multiple ways. So I think that there is so much we can learn, and I think we are just at the very, very, very beginning.
Yeah, fascinating field. So we mentioned you are at Sunnybrook in 2006. You moved there, and I've seen pictures. So you have a big group, right? How many members do you have there? And maybe also what's the philosophy of the group to bring solutions into the clinic, which is, a very challenging thing to do from research to practice, but you've been so successful at it already. So what is the secret? How big is your group? What's the philosophy there?
So yeah, my lab that I work in a lab is about 50 to 100 people, depending on time of year and how it is. Lots of undergraduate students, even high school students during summertime. So that's kind of my core. Then we have a clinical team. I don't know the exact number, quite large also now. And then we have a team who works with biology. Team who is looking different effects in brain. So I think that part of the success is that we have physics background, imaging background, and those expertise. We can develop devices, and then we have the biology collaborations and collaborators who can look at in animal models different ways of doing therapy. And then we have the clinical collaborations. And I think that all those three are important, and working together allows us to do things. I think that one of the main reasons why we have been successful in some of these things is that we have had good reviewers on our grants. People have been having faith that we can deliver, and we have had money to do it, because that is a key. Otherwise, you cannot hire people. And the philosophy for us is that anything we do, we want to see to benefit patients. and then commercialized. So we are happy to work with companies because it benefits us Sunnybrook patients. It's not a big impact, but it needs to benefit wider. So
yeah, that makes sense. Great. So you have talked about MR thermometry before, and also Nathan's role in that, which to me is it's a very different field to acoustics, right? It's MR physics based, I assume.
yeah.
Is it? And I think at that time, around maybe 2001, that was, I think, a key year with two breakthroughs. One was the blood-brain barrier paper you had, and then the other one, I think, also this CT-based planning algorithm. So how were you able to bring such diverse knowledge together? And then, if you want and possible, could you briefly explain how MR thermometry works?
Okay, so yeah, so to my interest in the MR guidance and thermometry came from my interest on the brain.
Yeah,
I knew that in order to put ultrasound beams in the brain, you have to have the best imaging. So I was very keen to integrate ultrasound transducers with the MRI scanner. And when I talked about it, people would say, "Oh, we don't know, that probably doesn't work, and interferences." And we built transducers, and we saw it works. And so the first aim was, okay, can we aim the beam to the right place based on MRI? And so that was the aim. And then we knew that, okay, well, T1 is temperature sensitive, so can we localize the hotspot there before we cause damage? And so that looked okay too. And then there was Japanese paper that Hiri Kuroda, who also was working at Prikamatov when I was there, he came up with the ideas of using the proton resonant frequency as an indicator of the temperature. So the proton resonant frequency depends on the molecular environment of the binding forces of the molecules to one another, what that frequency would be. And when you elevate the temperature, those connections becomes looser, and that's why the resonant frequency is shifting. And so that's how it works. And so we just be able to measure the frequency, and measuring the frequency is slow, but Higagi came with the idea of using phase imaging, which also tells about the proton resonant frequency, and do subtract the phase images and see the phase angle, and that is calibratable to the temperature change. So with MR thermometry, we can see how much the temperature is changing, and it's fairly precise, maybe half a degree or so. So you can see small temperature elevation. So you can use it to aim the beam to the target location before you apply. And I think that was a key in brain, especially. So that was so it was the brain stuff, getting it all together. It was quite interesting. We had these multiple projects that we were doing, and all thinking in the future that they'll come together, and luckily it worked that way at the end.
Yeah, that's really so impressive. So when I first heard of MR-guided focused ultrasound quite a while ago, I as a young person thought, oh, that's so cool. You will be in the MRI, so you could, while you do the lesion, scan fMRI and see the functional changes. And then most experts told me that's not possible, probably due to while you sonicate, you cannot really scan, or but I think people have told you a lot of times something is not possible, and then you made it work. So do you see a potential application of seeing the functioning brain while the lesion happens, or is that something you explore in the lab at all, or is that completely not possible?
No, I think that it's possible. We haven't explored it yet. There is some of the MR physicists are interested in it. So with the current device, it is difficult but not impossible. And with future devices, absolutely it will be possible. So it's not something cannot be. Yeah, usually when somebody says something cannot be done, I think that's okay, challenge.
Challenge accepted. Yeah, great. And I mean, especially for neuromodulation now, speaking about it, it would be so great to see live what, how the fMRI networks change and so on. So I think there would be even, neurofeedback applications and so on. So it's the big advantage is you will already be in the MRI. And for example, for most DBS cases, we are not, right? Or we then cannot with the electrode implant while we scan and so on. So yeah, this is really great. Then one other small, more technical question: what are typical limitations for applying ultrasound? So I know sometimes the skull is too thick, so we cannot even do it in some patients. And then also we can only reach regions in the center of the brain, center region of the brain. Is this correct? And then also are there other limitations of how this, is not just applicable for everything?
Yeah, so that is correct. Some cases, patients, it's not just that skull is too thick. So sometimes the skull is easy to go through, but it's just there's something there that makes it difficult, and that's known from diagnostic ultrasound. For many years, people know that there are certain skulls that you cannot go through as well. So yeah, I think in the future it's getting better. I think we can do a better job focusing. The focusing is not perfect yet, so it could be improved. So that will help a little bit to increase the envelope, how far you can go, and get more cases where you can go to the skull. But I think the eventual solution is to use these microbubbles to enhance the ultrasound absorption at the focus. So that way you get less, you need to put less ultrasound through the skull bone, and then you don't overheat and you can go anywhere in the brain. And in animals, that is working well. So I think that eventually that will be the way. I strongly believe that brain surgery, destroying brain tissue, that focus ultrasound is the tool that can do it anywhere. So I like.
That's great.
For sure.
And then I think if you apply sonications too long or even in repeated sessions, you need at some point higher energy to get the same effect. Something in the skull seems to change, but we don't yet understand what. Is that true? Or is that an effect you usually observe?
Yeah, so there are kind of two things. One is that we go too high and you can see in CT scans these lesions developing. So there is a overheating of the skull and you develop necrosis, I think, and denaturing of the protein. So that my guess is that the attenuation of the skull bone goes up, and we have seen that kind of in ex vivo skulls. So that will mean you need more energy, but there is also a situation when you sonicate and then you see the temperature go and it starts leveling off, and that in my what we have done quite a few experiments on it, and I think the issue there is the skull is heating, and now the speed of sound is changing, so your correction algorithms are not accurate anymore, so you get blurring of the focus while you go. And if you go too high in the skull heats up, and then you go and repeat it, and now you have attenuation changes also, so you get less energy through, and now it still hits even more, and now you blur the beam even more. So I think that is maybe the explanation.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that would speak again either for microbubbles to reduce the dose, or for maybe thermometry in the skull, right, to then adjust the algorithms. But I'm sure you're at least in experiments thinking about these things.
Yeah, we actually have shown it that we can use the ultrasound to pick up the temperature elevation in the skull, and use that to correct the phasing. So you have to shift the phasing during the treatment. but we haven't implemented that in practice yet. It's experience easy, but to implement in 1,000-element array is not trivial.
Sounds great. Very, very interesting. All right. So I want to be mindful of your time. I want to ask you one more personal question, and then maybe some rapid fire wrap up questions. So you are from Finland, if I'm correct, and you moved to the US. When did you move to the US and why? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm from Finland. I moved to UK in 1980 to get my PhD, and I went back to Finland to do my national service, so in the Finnish Army for a year, and then I got an offer to go to Arizona, 1984, for 2 years. It has stretched a little bit longer. So that's how it started.
You stayed since 84. That's my birth year. So that means you've been there for almost 40 years now. Do you feel home in the US? Or now in Canada?
Now in Canada, so
yeah,
half of the time in Canada. I've been felt home anywhere I've been, actually. I try to see the good things in every place and forget the bad things. Every place has good things and every place has bad things. So Finland has good things and Finland has bad things. And the things that I miss there and things that I don't miss.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Do you ever think about going home to Finland one day to retire or to...
No, because that was my original plan, but our children are in US, so grandchildren, it's just would not be possible for me to go back to Finland and leave all the family here. So
yeah, great. Okay, interesting. And then again, so to wrap up, some rapid fire questions. We have talked about the FAST device you're currently developing, but maybe if you could be bold and think about how will the next generation FAST device look like in 20 years? What's the future of FAST? Maybe that's a bit better question. What will we solve in that time?
Oh, yeah, 20 years, everybody will have ultrasound device in their home for both entertainment and for sleep help or whatever it might be. So
yeah, that is interesting. Sorry, I need more information now. What would they use it for? For neurostimulation? And you said entertainment.
I think that so what we will, you could have an ultrasound device and you turn it on and say, okay, well, I want to sleep 8 hours, and we'll stimulate your brain to let you sleep 8 hours. And you could use it for entertainment. You could, okay, well, what pleasure center you want to stimulate, what feelings you want to have.
Interesting.
So that's kind of
and just for the record, you're not joking. You actually mean that.
Yeah, actually, I mean.
That's great. Love it. We'll see. So yeah, that would be an exciting future. So I guess what you're saying and how you come to this is probably because if it's safe and cheap enough, then why not, right? Probably that's the as soon as there are solutions for it, people will buy them. I probably agree to that. Yeah.
The first step probably will be that it is used for like depression or blood pressure or something like that, where people put the helmet on and get the treatment every day, and then I think eventually it will evolve to the entertainment. But I'm scared of that, so I hope not.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. Okay, interesting. Then we have talked about eureka moments. So one eureka moment you had when you thought about the density and speed of sound. Other moments of your career where you thought, wow, now I understood this, or this was a great success, or positive anecdotes you may want to share of. I'm sure you had many of them, but
so there's some of course reading that Fry paper. I remember being in the library and reading it and realizing, okay, you can do brain therapy. then when we injected the microbubbles in the first experiment and sonicated, and I saw the first image, I exactly knew why it worked and why it caused massive damage, but I knew how it works and why. And I just, again, same with the density. Okay, well, why didn't I think this first before? Because it's so obvious now. So those are a couple of things, and then some other, quite a few, but those are the two that relate to this topic.
What about the negative moments? I heard that, for example, there was the first hemorrhage at the Brigham that put everything on a halt. But I think you've been so successful, so it's also sometimes helpful for listeners to hear about maybe the more negative points or even waste of time, or episodes where you feel like, this didn't go well. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so that case, so I had early on in Arizona, we treated hyperthermia brain, and patient died a couple of days later. So that was kind of a moment where it was not treatment mistake, but just demonstrated the legacy of brain.
Yeah.
In Boston, I had left Boston before they did that experiment, and that was done with the low frequency device. And I would have. So I have mentioned that is the danger of getting cavitation and causing a bleeding in that device. So I think so I was happy I wasn't there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
but the other thing with the blood-brain barrier, we spent 5 years doing test after test after test and not seeing consistent blood-brain barrier opening. Sometimes it was good, and sometimes then we had so damage, and just trying new things. Luckily we didn't give up. So
yeah, 5 years sounds like a very long time, and it may relate to the sweet spot we talked about, right? Where too much, you want to be probably at the exact, and getting to that exact window is probably not easy, I could imagine. Yeah. I have one guess.
It was the introduction of the bubbles that solved it. So now you get the effect in the vessel itself, not on the surrounding brain.
That makes sense. Yeah. I have a guest question by Rhys Cosgrove, again, our neurosurgeon here at the Brigham. He has always wondered about where, when, and how you got the idea that we should be able to overcome the barrier of the skull. And you in part already answered this also with the Fry paper, but he specifically asked, were you a high schooler or university student, and what experience prompted this question that then set you on your life's course? Can you point it to a moment even?
Yeah, no, that was the moment that I mentioned. I was in the
library.
Yes, library, Forest Hills Library in Aberdeen, and the University Library. And every lunch hour I went there and read the papers, with new papers as they're coming out. And I saw that, and I read so many books saying it's impossible to go through the skull, and I saw you can get some through, and then I realized, okay, if you get some through and then you distribute it all over the head, you have big window, you should be able to focus tight enough to overcome the skull. And that was the moment. And
so you were a university student?
Yes.
Grad or?
Yeah, grad student.
Grad student, okay, interesting. Great. Then what do you have any advice for young researchers that enter neuroscience or academia? Any tips?
Enjoy it. It is my hobby. It's not my work. If it's your work, you cannot be successful because of takes so many hours, so much stuff thinking. So you have to enjoy it, and be willing to work with lots of people. So it's not one man show. So collaboration as a team, you can do much better, and don't worry too much about who gets the credit. So that's that.
Sounds good.
The goal is the important one.
Great. The future of the field, we have talked about the future of FAS. Can you think about the future of neuromodulation in general? Do you think more invasive procedures like the brain stimulation will ultimately be taken over entirely by FAS, or is there even something that we don't think of that will come and take over everything? Or how do you think the future of neuromodulation will look like?
Well, I mean, I think that non-invasive techniques will be better than invasive techniques. And like I indicated, that I think we will have devices that I use to even at home to improve patients' conditions. I think we can do so much with neuromodulation. I mean, I think it will allow so many things, good things and maybe bad things, enhance performance for sure. Might not be great. But yeah, I think that we are just in the very beginning, and I don't know, there might be something new that I don't understand, some way of getting energy in. But right now, ultrasound is the best because you can do it non-invasively and fairly precisely. There will be new ways how you can make the focal spot smaller and more precise, and eventually you want to be in cell level. And I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure somebody will figure it out.
That sounds interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could think about something like, in optogenetics where you tag specific cells. You could think of tagging them to make them more susceptible to FASA. So yeah, interesting. Any missed opportunities that the field currently has? What should we be doing but are not as a field?
You're talking brain specifically, or
main interest is the brain, but anything is interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the field is developing very, very nicely. Lots of people looking lots of things. The danger, of course, is that if you're not very careful with brain, something can happen that stops the progress for a long time. And it came very close to that, and then Brigham many years ago. Luckily, we were able to move forward.
When was that, by the way? Do you remember the year?
So I think it was 2006, 2007 when that treatment was done. But so the things like that in brain, it's very, very delicate. So so we don't know. But I think there are things that could have been faster, but that's the nature of research. So I don't think there are too many missed opportunities. The door is opening. There are many, many more ultrasound interactions people are discovering in the brain. So yeah, it's a great time to be in the beginning of this somebody's career, because definitely feel that will go for 50 years at least. So
I totally agree. So to conclude, is there any last question? Is there any topic you would have liked to talk about, or any period of time that I missed or that we missed? I know we covered a lot, but anything else you wanted to mention?
Oh, no, it has been good. Nice to talk.
Okay, then thank you one more time. This was really, really helpful. A big honor to talk to you, and I know this was a lot of time. So thank you one more time.
Well, thanks for doing it. It's great to talk about all things.
Great.